Hi everybody, welcome to my video on how do you have difficult conversations, the Woman of Color edition. So everything that we do with the Be Free Woman is designed to support women of color, to remove any barrier that stands in the way of her personal and professional success. So I polled women of color around the country, various age groups, various professional backgrounds, various socioeconomic statuses, asking them one question. What are the top issues that you're facing? And tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. That's how we design everything at the Be Free Woman. And what came up over and over again was, how do I have difficult conversations as a woman of color where I can unapologetically own my identity, my brilliance, and my expertise, and still speak my truth and work through the conflict without having to feel like I need to shrink or hide who I am, so that people don't put me in a stereotype box. So that's what this video is all about. So the first tip and strategy as a woman of color is to connect to your core. What do I mean by that? When you need to have a difficult conversation, you have to have the conversation with yourself first, before you even begin to speak to somebody else. And the first thing you need to do is go inside and ask yourself, who's involved in this? Who's involved in this conflict? Who's involved in this difficult conversation? You, whoever the other people are, name who's involved, and then you should think about the what. What actually happened, right? And try to think about what actually happened from a non-biased perspective. Try to record as much as you can the facts about what happened. And then you want to ask yourself, how does this situation, this conversation that I need to have, impact me and my identity as a woman of color? How did this situation impact how I see myself as it relates to my self-esteem? And then the next thing you want to do is to ask yourself, why did it happen? How did I get to this place? And when you think about the why, you want to think of it as, what did everybody in this situation contribute to get us to this point? You know, we want to be honest with ourselves and not to think of it as a blame. We want to think of it as a contribution system. Well, how did what everyone did contribute to getting us to this particular point of where we are right now? Then after you've done that self-work of connecting to your core, you can then ask yourself, do I need to have a conversation? And I'm going to be real here. Sometimes we don't need to have a difficult conversation with people, because things can be changed simply by changing ourselves. The reality is that sometimes we end up in difficult situations because we allow ourselves to be in conflict. We allow ourselves to be in situations that cause us to shrink. Right? And so you can ask yourself, can I fix the situation by simply changing me? Which I believe a lot of things in the world can be fixed by changing yourself. But if you decide, you know, I need to have this conversation with my colleague or my husband or my friend, because I feel like if we don't have this difficult conversation, we're going to keep running into the same issue. And in that case, when you say, yes, I need to have the difficult conversation, then the next thing you need to do is to set an intention. You have to decide, what am I hoping to learn from this conversation, and where do I want to grow in this conversation? And so I love this. Oprah Winfrey says that, you know, whenever she used to record her shows and the producer would bring an idea, she would ask them, what's your intention for this show? What do you want people to get out of watching this show? And so when we set our conversations with intention, it ensures that we stay on focus to the purpose of that conversation. So you've decided to have the conversation, you're sitting across from the other person, and you want to think about having the conversation with the 3 L's. You want to think about having the conversation with the 3 L's, which is look, listen, and learn. These are the 3 L's that were taught to me by my mother, Darlene Fisher, and I love this concept. So you're sitting across the table, you want to make sure you're entering into the conversation with love. Right? You want to make sure you're entering into this conversation with an open heart, and enter into this conversation without your emotions being on 100. If you do step 1, which is connect to your core, which is essential, you will be able to enter into this conversation at a space where you are calm, at a space where you are grounded, and at a space where you've worked through a lot of your emotions and your feelings and the identity work so that you can have a productive conversation with this particular person. So when I say, look, you want to approach this conversation with the perspective of hearing from both sides. This difficult conversation is not about you confirming everything that the person has ever done wrong to you. It's listening with the posture of, there's two perspectives here. There's two things that has happened. The reality is the only thing you know about this conversation, or about the incident rather, is your intentions and the impact of the other person's behavior on yourself. You don't know the intentions of the other person or the impact of your behavior on that person. Therefore, you want to enter the conversation with a both and posture, looking for both of those perspectives. The next thing you want to do is listen. You want to listen for that both and. What do I mean by that? You want to listen with both and, meaning that there's two stories here. So I want to not only hear my story, I also want to be able to listen to the other person's story and realize both perspectives are valid. Now, sometimes people say to me, Anise, I could be sitting across the table from somebody that's a liar. I know they're lying to me. They're not being truthful. That could very well be true. But in that person's mind, that's their reality. So you want to hear their reality. You want to hear their perspective so that you know what prompted their actions. And what I have found in moments where I've had to have a difficult conversation is a person has crafted the world in their own lens, and I crafted the world in my own lens, my own view, and then we come together and it's like, wow, I can see why we ended up in this conflict, because we have two very different perspectives. So you definitely want to be listening for that both and. The third thing is to learn. You want to seek clarity in this situation. The goal is for you to learn what happened on that person's end, because you already know what happened on your end, and you also want to learn about how did your actions impact that other person. Next, we're going to move into co-creating mutually beneficial solutions. And I state this for a reason, as a co-creation and from mutually beneficial lens. What do I mean by that? You're not going to resolve a difficult conversation by going in, telling somebody what you feel, and then putting all these demands and expectations on that person. It's not going to work. The way that you truly heal and get to a mutually beneficial place is that both people begin to set expectations. Both people share what they need to move on from this particular situation. This is also a time where I call you to apologize if you need to apologize. If you need to say I'm sorry because your actions, impacted someone, or you might curse somebody out or said something or showed up in a way that you didn't want to show up. But only apologize if it's warranted, ladies. As women of color, we apologize a lot for everything. And we just live in an apologetic culture where we're always saying, I'm sorry. You don't need to say I'm sorry if it's not warranted. But if it is, make amends, swallow your pride, be courageous, and apologize in that particular situation. You also got to be willing to own your shit. You got to be willing to own your role in the mess. Because a part of co-creating solutions, mutually beneficial, is for each person to own. And what I find sometimes is that when I am courageous and I own my stuff, people then will own their stuff. Because I send a message, I begin to model the type of authenticity and truth that I'm seeking in this particular relationship. Trust me, it works miracles. The last thing is, you want to begin to set boundaries and new expectations, okay? You want to be able to say, we did end up in this difficult situation, which led to us having a difficult conversation. So what new boundaries and expectations do we need to set? And boundaries is a woman's best friend, it's a man's best friend, it's everybody's best friends. And when you get on the same page with setting expectations, that then allows you to move forward in a healthy manner. Because oftentimes in relationships, we don't set mutual expectations with one another. I have my expectations in my head, you have your expectations in your head, and we're both walking around in this relationship without having a conversation. And so naturally, we're going to eventually get to a point where we bump heads, which will require us to have a meeting of the minds on what are our mutual expectations. And then what you have to do is you have to follow up after you co-create mutually beneficial solutions. Follow-up is really key. We have to be consistent. What happens a lot is that we have a difficult conversation, we say a bunch of stuff that we're going to do differently, and then we never follow up, and then sometimes you end up in the situation again because you didn't follow up. So set a mutually agreed upon time frame for the both of you to check back in to see, are things working the way you want them to work? Do you need to make any shifts? Now the last step that I said, this is really important. We have to make room in our mind and our spirit. What do I mean by that? We have to make it a practice of having difficult conversations, but you must choose wisely. Why? We don't have enough strength in us to have difficult conversations all day, every day. You will find yourself grumpy and unhappy. So I believe very strongly in picking and choosing your battles. That's why I said in number 2, make the decision, right? Because you don't have to always have a difficult conversation. You can simply make a decision to change yourself. However, the more you get into the practice of speaking your truth, the more you get into the practice of unapologetically owning who you are and also challenging systems of sexism and racism when they come up in your life, or challenge when people mistreat you, the more you flex that muscle, you then make room for your mind and your spirit to be free. You make room for you to live more of a stress-free life. You know, if we don't have difficult conversations, then what happens is that we essentially build up all of this tension in our relationships. We build up tension in our body, and it's not healthy. So you want to free your mind and free your spirit by making it a daily practice, you know, as needed, and choosing wisely to have these difficult conversations. And I believe that if you follow these steps, the idea of connecting to your core, making a decision and setting an intention, having a conversation with the 3 L's of look, listen, and learn, co-creating mutually beneficial solutions, and opening your mind and your spirit, making room in your mind and your spirit, then I believe that you will live a much happier life, and that you will be able to walk this earth and say, I unapologetically own my identity, my brilliance, and my expertise, and I'm also empowering other women to do the same. Let's break barriers and build a legacy.